In the summer of 1942, deep in the rolling hills of eastern Tennessee, something extraordinary began to take shape. Vast stretches of farmland were suddenly seized by the United States government. Within days, more than 1,000 families were ordered to pack their belongings and leave the only homes they had ever known. Soldiers arrived with maps, engineers followed with blueprints, and fences were hammered into the ground across the green valleys of the Clinch River. Nobody was told what was happening. Before we continue, please subscribe to this channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us bring you more incredible true stories from history. For months, rumors spread through nearby towns. Some said the army was building a new munitions depot. Others whispered about a secret training base. But the truth was far beyond anything they could imagine. Hidden behind barbed wire, guarded by military police, and erased from every map in the country, a brand new city was being built. A city with one purpose: to create the world's first atomic bomb. They called it Oak Ridge. At first, Oak Ridge didn't even have a name. Officially, it was known as the Clinton Engineer Works, a code designation to confuse anyone who might ask too many questions. Construction began in October 1942 under the direction of the Army Corps of Engineers, specifically the newly formed Manhattan Engineer District, the organization that would later become known simply as the Manhattan Project. In less than a year, the quiet Tennessee Valley transformed into one of the largest construction sites on Earth. Bulldozers flattened hills, roads cut through forests, and rail lines stretched into the heart of the restricted zone. At its peak, more than 60,000 workers labored day and night, building an entire city from nothing. Houses, hospitals, schools, theaters, stores, and massive industrial complexes surrounded by armed guards. Yet almost none of those workers knew what they were building. To most, it was simply the project. They were told that their efforts would help end the war, but no one explained how. Scientists, engineers, and soldiers lived side by side under strict orders not to speak about their work. Letters were censored, phones were tapped, and even family members were forbidden from discussing daily tasks. Signs around the city reminded everyone, what you see here, what you do here, what you hear here, when you leave here. Let it stay here. The secrecy was absolute. Many of the workers were young women, clerks, typists, and machine operators hired straight out of high school. They sat at long rows of control panels, turning knobs and watching dials that measured mysterious readings. They had no idea that the strange numbers they were recording were the results of uranium enrichment, the delicate process of separating uranium-235, the isotope necessary for an atomic chain reaction. Behind the scenes, some of the brightest scientific minds in the world had gathered to make the impossible possible. Physicists like Ernest Lawrence, Robert Oppenheimer, and Enrico Fermi coordinated efforts between secret sites across America: Los Alamos in New Mexico, Hanford in Washington, and Oak Ridge in Tennessee. Oak Ridge's role was vital: to produce the fissile material that would power the bomb itself. 3 massive plants were constructed, each using a different experimental method to separate uranium isotopes: the Y-12 electromagnetic plant, the K-25 gaseous diffusion plant, and the S-50 thermal diffusion plant. Together, they formed the heart of Oak Ridge's mission, a monumental industrial effort unlike anything the world had ever seen. Y-12 alone covered more than 800 acres and used miles of copper wire, so much that the U.S. Treasury had to borrow nearly 14,000 tons of silver from Fort Knox to replace copper shortages caused by wartime demand. The silver was shaped into coils for massive magnets used in the calutrons, devices designed to separate uranium atoms by weight. The work was so secret that most of the women operating these machines didn't even know what they were doing, only that the needles on the dials had to stay steady, and that their performance was measured with military precision. When supervisors noticed that young women were more consistent at maintaining stable readings than the male scientists, they were hired in huge numbers. "The girls don't ask questions," one engineer noted, "and they keep the dials right where we want them." The city grew faster than anyone could believe. By 1944, Oak Ridge had more than 75,000 residents, making it the 5th largest city in Tennessee, though it still did not appear on any map. Its workers lived in neat rows of prefabricated houses, known as alphabet houses, Because of their simple letter-coded designs, A, B, C, and D, the streets were unpaved, the air thick with the noise of generators and construction, and the entire area was surrounded by watchtowers and checkpoints. Every person entering or leaving was searched. Vehicles were inspected, bags were opened, and identification badges were mandatory at all times. Cameras were strictly prohibited. Even children were reminded at school never to repeat anything they overheard at home. Despite the secrecy, Oak Ridge was a functioning city in every sense. There were schools, churches, grocery stores, movie theaters, and even dance halls. The residents lived ordinary lives, or at least tried to. They played baseball, went on picnics, and gathered for Sunday services. Yet beneath the surface, everyone knew something enormous was happening, something that could change the world. When the first shipment of enriched uranium left Oak Ridge in early 1945, almost no one there knew it. The train cars were unmarked, guarded by soldiers, and labeled simply as special cargo. It traveled west, toward New Mexico, to a place called Los Alamos, where the final assembly of the bomb would take place. By the spring of 1945, the war in Europe was nearing its end, but the war in the Pacific was still raging. American troops faced fierce resistance on every island, and the cost of each victory was measured in thousands of lives. Meanwhile, behind the guarded gates of Oak Ridge, the machines continued to hum, louder than ever. The workers didn't know it, but their task was almost complete. Day after day, trains rolled in and out of the secret city. They brought food, coal, machinery, and endless crates of supplies. Every shipment was recorded and checked by the military police. The residents of Oak Ridge learned to ignore the constant noise, the rumbling of trucks, the clatter of trains, the low hum of power lines. Life went on as usual, but deep inside the Y-12 and K-25 plants, scientists were refining the final traces of uranium that would soon leave Tennessee forever. At Los Alamos, New Mexico, the material from Oak Ridge arrived in sealed containers. Only a handful of people in the entire country knew what it truly was: uranium-235, the rarest substance on Earth. Under the leadership of physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer, the team at Los Alamos was racing against time to build a weapon that could end the war before the enemy did the same. The tension was enormous. The scientists understood that what they were doing would change the course of history. Some believed it would save millions of lives. Others feared it would unleash something that could never be controlled again. But the work pressed on day and night. Back in Oak Ridge, people continued to live their lives inside the wire. Newspapers were censored, mail was inspected, and radio broadcasts carried only approved content. Even the weather reports were restricted. Officials worried that too much information might help spies identify the city's location. The residents called themselves the Invisible Army. They worked, ate, and slept in secrecy, and they were proud of it, even if they didn't understand why. The women at Y-12 kept turning their dials, never knowing that each careful movement helped create the fuel for the bomb that would destroy Hiroshima. They were told only that their job was vital, that the war depended on them. "Keep the needle steady," the supervisor said. "That's all you need to know." Sometimes when the machines overheated or failed, the young workers would stare at the dials, wondering what they were really controlling. But no one dared to ask. Asking questions could mean losing your job, or worse. Oak Ridge had its own kind of rhythm. Every morning, buses picked up workers from the surrounding barracks and took them to one of the guarded plants. The streets were crowded with uniforms, soldiers, scientists, and civilians all moving with quiet purpose. Cafeterias served thousands of meals a day, movie theaters played patriotic films, and bulletin boards displayed posters that reminded everyone to stay silent. Loose lips sink ships. When in doubt, keep it out. For most, the war existed only through rumors. No one knew how much longer it would last, or what the project was truly building. But hope was everywhere. Hope that their work, whatever it was, might finally bring peace. Then, one morning in early August 1945, the radio crackled with a message that would change everything. "Today, the United States dropped a new and powerful bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima," President Harry S. Truman announced. "It is an atomic bomb. It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe." The news spread through Oak Ridge like wildfire. Workers poured into the streets, stunned, confused, and proud. Some cheered, waving flags. Others stood silently, realizing for the first time what they had been a part of. Mary, a young operator at Y-12, remembered the moment vividly. "They said the bomb that ended the war came from our town. I didn't know whether to be proud or scared. We had no idea, none. That night the entire city celebrated. Banners appeared saying, 'Oak Ridge did it,' and 'The war is over.' For the first time, the people could talk freely about their work, though most still didn't understand the full scale of what they had built. But not everyone celebrated. Among the scientists and officers there was unease. The same weapon that ended the war had killed tens of thousands in seconds. Oppenheimer, upon hearing of the bomb's success, quoted from the ancient Hindu text Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." When the second bomb fell on Nagasaki days later, the war finally came to an end. Japan surrendered. The world had changed forever. In the weeks that followed, Oak Ridge began to open its gates. The barbed wire remained, but reporters were allowed inside for the first time. What they saw astonished them. A vast industrial city hidden in plain sight, built in less than 3 years, powered by miles of cables and machines that had consumed more electricity than New York City. The people of Oak Ridge finally learned the truth, that they had been part of the greatest secret in modern history. They had lived in a city that wasn't supposed to exist, built a weapon that wasn't supposed to be possible, and helped end a war that had consumed the world. Many felt pride. Others felt guilt. But all of them knew one thing. They had witnessed the dawn of a new age, of the atomic age. In the days following Japan's surrender, Oak Ridge was no longer silent. For the first time since its creation, the people inside the fences could speak freely about where they had been and what they had done. Newspapers across America published photos of the once mysterious Clinton Engineer Works, now revealed to the world as one of the 3 main sites of the Manhattan Project. Reporters described it as a city that shouldn't exist, a city that built the bomb. Yet even as the world celebrated the end of the war, many residents struggled to understand their own emotions. Some wept with pride, others with confusion. "I remember standing there," one worker said, "thinking, we helped end the war then, but at what cost?" Overnight, Oak Ridge went from a code name to a headline. Buses, once marked only with numbers, now carried signs that proudly read, "Oak Ridge, Tennessee." Visitors flooded in, journalists, scientists, government officials, and even tourists. They wanted to see the place that had produced the power of the atom. The city was a strange mixture of the ordinary and the unimaginable. Rows of modest houses stood beside towering industrial plants, surrounded by fences and armed guards. Children played in yards where, months earlier, trucks had carried radioactive materials. Soldiers still patrolled the gates, but now they smiled for cameras. The federal government quickly realized that Oak Ridge could not remain frozen in secrecy forever. By 1946, the fences were still there, but the guards had relaxed their watch. Civilians were allowed to move in and out, and businesses began to open to serve the population that had once lived under total lockdown. The people who had built the city, carpenters, clerks, engineers, and cooks, faced a choice. Some packed their belongings and returned to the towns they had left years earlier. Others stayed. They had built their lives in Oak Ridge, fallen in love, raised children, and forged friendships inside the fences. Leaving didn't feel right, so they stayed. And slowly Oak Ridge began to change. In 1947, control of the site passed from the military to the newly formed Atomic Energy Commission. The Manhattan Project was officially over, but the work of atomic research had only just begun. Oak Ridge became a center for nuclear science, medicine, and energy. A place where scientists studied not how to destroy, but how to understand and harness the atom. The city that had once been erased from maps now appeared proudly on them. It even had its own newspaper, the Oak Ridge Journal, which printed stories about community events, schools, and local heroes, the kind of stories every normal town had. Though Oak Ridge had never been a normal town, life in post-war Oak Ridge carried a peculiar duality. The same laboratories that had once refined uranium for bombs were now studying isotopes to treat cancer. The same engineers who had designed systems of secrecy were now writing textbooks about nuclear safety. The transformation was profound, And yet the shadow of the past lingered over every street. Many residents spoke of strange dreams, memories of gates, guards, and warnings never to speak. Even after the war, some found it hard to talk about what they had done. "We lived so long with secrets," one woman said, "that silence became a habit." Across America, the word atomic became a symbol of progress and fear all at once. There were atomic cars, atomic toys, atomic cafes, even atomic beauty contests. But behind the enthusiasm was anxiety. The bomb had given humanity new power. And with it came a new kind of terror. The fear that one city could erase another in an instant. Oak Ridge stood at the center of that paradox, both the birthplace of destruction and the cradle of discovery. In 1949, President Harry Truman visited the city to recognize its contribution to the war and its promise for peace. Standing before a crowd of thousands, he said, "The people of Oak Ridge have shown what American courage, ingenuity, and sacrifice can achieve. But let us also remember that the power created here must be used for the good of mankind." The applause was thunderous, but behind the cheers was a quiet awareness that the world could never go back to what it was before 1945. By the early 1950s, Oak Ridge had become a model for America's new scientific future. The Oak Ridge National Laboratory, ORNL, expanded its research into physics, chemistry, and biology. It produced medical isotopes used in hospitals worldwide. The graphite reactor, once part of the Manhattan Project, became the first nuclear reactor in history to produce electricity for public use, a small light bulb powered by the same science that had ended the war. Visitors came from around the globe to see the city that had started in secrecy and grown into a beacon of knowledge. Still, reminders of the old days remained everywhere. Guard towers stood empty but unremoved. Hold posters faded on walls, "Don't talk and the enemy listens." And in attics, residents kept their original badges, passes, and ration cards, small souvenirs of a time when they had lived in a world apart. Some former workers became advocates for peace, joining movements to limit nuclear weapons. Others defended what they had done, arguing that their work had saved lives by ending the war sooner. The debate never truly ended. Even decades later, the question remained, was Oak Ridge the city that saved the world, or the city that doomed it to fear? For many who had lived there, the answer was simpler. Oak Ridge was home. They remembered the laughter at dances, the sound of children running between wooden houses, the smell of coal fires on cold mornings. They remembered the friendships forged under pressure and the pride of contributing to something larger than themselves. "We were part of history," one resident said softly, "even if we didn't know it." Today, Oak Ridge still stands, no longer hidden, no longer secret. The laboratories remain, but the fences are gone. Visitors can walk through museums built in the old plants, where the stories of the workers and scientists are preserved in photographs and recordings. Standing there, among the rusted machines and faded warning signs, one can almost hear the echoes of the past, the hum of generators, the click of instruments, the murmur of voices that kept a secret so enormous it changed the course of humanity. As the decades passed, the fences of Oak Ridge rusted, but the memory of what had been done there never faded. The people who had once lived behind barbed wire grew old, raised children, and watched their strange city become a place of science rather than secrecy. Yet deep down, each of them carried a quiet question, one that no newspaper, no monument, and no historian could ever fully answer. Had they helped save the world? Or change it forever in a way that could never be undone? In the 1950s, when the Cold War began, the meaning of their work shifted again. The same discoveries that had ended World War II now fueled an arms race unlike anything humanity had ever seen. The Soviet Union tested its own atomic bomb, and suddenly, what had been America's greatest secret was no secret at all. The age of nuclear deterrence was born. For many of the men and women of Oak Ridge, this new reality was painful to watch. They had believed their work would bring peace. Instead, they saw the world living under the shadow of a mushroom cloud. Schoolchildren practiced hiding under desks. Cities built shelters underground. The dream of safety had become a science of fear. Still, Oak Ridge endured. Its laboratories helped pioneer peaceful uses of atomic energy, nuclear medicine, reactor design, radiation therapy, and materials science. The same intellect that had once been hidden behind fences was now shared with the world. The town that had started as a secret became a symbol of human possibility, proof that knowledge could be turned toward healing as well as harm. The 1960s and 1970s brought reflection. Veterans of the Manhattan Project began to speak publicly for the first time. Some traveled to universities to tell their stories. Others wrote letters to newspapers, insisting that the world remember the moral weight of what they had built. One scientist wrote, "We were told we were building something to end all wars. I still hope that was true." In those years, documentaries began to appear, black and white footage of dusty roads, young women at their control panels, soldiers guarding gates in the rain. Viewers were astonished. How could such a vast operation have remained invisible for so long? It was almost impossible to believe that an entire city of 75,000 people could exist in secret, yet it had. For the people who had lived there, Oak Ridge remained a paradox, a place of pride and pain. Some avoided the subject altogether, unable to reconcile the joy of victory with the horror that followed. Others embraced remembrance. Each August, small groups gathered in local churches and schools to pray for peace and to remember both the lives lost in Hiroshima and those who had labored in Oak Ridge. By the 1980s, the city had become open, green, and ordinary, or as ordinary as a place with such a past could be. Children rode bicycles where guards once stood. Couples picnicked beside the Clinch River, unaware that the water had once reflected the glow of guarded lights. The hum of machines was replaced by the rustle of leaves. Yet if you spoke with the old-timers, their voices still carried that mix of awe and disbelief. One former worker recalled, "When I came here, I was 20 and scared. They told us we were doing something important, but no one said what. When the war ended, I thought I'd go home. But Oak Ridge became home." He looked at the hills that had once hidden the most secret project on Earth and smiled softly. Maybe we were part of something bigger than any of us could understand. Today, visitors to Oak Ridge can walk through the American Museum of Science and Energy, where artifacts from the Manhattan Project are displayed under bright glass. There are photos of young women sitting at control panels, notebooks filled with coded entries and yellowed posters warning, "Silence means security." You can see the graphite reactor, preserved as a national monument, its concrete walls unchanged since the 1940s. Standing there, you can almost feel the weight of history pressing through the quiet. Outside, the modern city feels peaceful. Children laugh in playgrounds. Cafes serve coffee where army trucks once rolled. The air smells of rain and pine, not of oil and smoke, but if you close your eyes, you can still imagine the echo of the past, the engines, the whistles, the constant pulse of power that once flowed from every transformer. What remains most powerful, though, are the stories. Thousands of people who never knew what they were building, yet gave their strength, their youth, and their silence to a cause that would reshape humanity. They weren't generals or scientists or presidents. They were ordinary citizens, caught up in extraordinary times. They had built a city that didn't exist. They had kept a secret that changed the world, and even now, nearly a century later, their legacy endures, not just in the laboratories or the textbooks, but in the questions that still haunt us. What does progress mean? What is the cost of discovery? And can the same hands that create destruction also create hope? As the sun sets over the Tennessee hills, the city glows with quiet lights. Oak Ridge, once hidden, now remembered, stands as both warning and testament. A reminder that human ingenuity is limitless, but so too is human responsibility. Because in the end, history isn't just about what we build, it's about what we choose to remember. And somewhere, beyond the whisper of the trees and the hum of distant power lines, you can almost hear the voices of those who built the secret city, proud, uncertain, and forever bound to the story of the atom. Epilogue. History often remembers the moments of triumph, the great inventions, the victories, the discoveries that changed the course of humanity. But behind those moments are always people, ordinary people, who worked, hoped, and sacrificed without knowing how history would judge them. Oak Ridge was full of such people. They didn't seek glory. They didn't dream of shaping the future. They simply answered a call, a letter in the mail, a quiet invitation, a promise of work to help their country win a terrible war. They left their homes, their families, and their names behind. And in the shadows of the Tennessee hills, they built something the world had never seen before. They lived behind barbed wire, surrounded by silence and secrecy. They worked 12-hour shifts beside machines whose purpose they couldn't guess. They watched the dials move, the lights blink, the needles tremble, unaware that each turn of a knob was changing the course of history. When the war ended, they celebrated like everyone else. But in their celebration, there was something deeper, a realization that they had been part of something vast, something that reached far beyond their understanding. They had built a city that didn't appear on any map, and with it a weapon that ended a war and began another kind of fear. Decades later, many of them would still wonder, did we do the right thing? No answer ever came, because the truth is complicated as the science they served. Oak Ridge stands today as a place of memory and transformation. It's no longer a fortress of secrecy, but a city of learning and research, where scientists study energy, medicine, and the mysteries of the universe. The machines that once separated uranium now inspire a new generation to explore the atom not as a weapon, but as a source of understanding. Visitors walk through its quiet streets and see ordinary houses, schools, and churches. But if you listen closely, you can almost hear the echo of history in the wind, the hum of generators, the rumble of trains, the faint laughter of young workers who never knew they were changing the world. Their story is more than a tale of science or war. It's a story about humanity, about what we create when we unite, and what we risk when we lose sight of what creation means. The secret city of Oak Ridge will always be a paradox, a symbol of both the best and the worst of human achievement. But perhaps its greatest legacy is not the bomb, nor the power of the atom, but the reminder it leaves us that knowledge is never neutral, and every discovery carries the weight of choice, because every generation builds its own kind of secret city, a place where progress and conscience meet, where what we can do must always be measured by what we should do. And in that balance lies the story of us all.